The orphanage's front office smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish. David sat in a wooden chair too big for him, his feet swinging above the floor. He wasn't used to visitors, let alone potential adoptive parents. Most couples barely made eye contact before deciding he wasn't a fit. But the moment Daniel Atkinson stepped through the doorway, something shifted. The man's presence wasn't loud or overbearing. It was steady, like a calm sea. He was in his mid-40s, dressed in a pressed shirt and worn leather jacket, his eyes bright but kind. "David," Daniel said, crouching slightly so their eyes met. His voice carried a warmth that reached somewhere deep in David, like an old song he half remembered. They spoke for only a few minutes, about books, about science, about whether David liked cats or dogs, but the boy noticed something odd. He felt completely at ease. Not just polite, comfortable, but safe, like he'd known this man for years. He couldn't explain it, and he didn't try. When Daniel signed the last of the paperwork, the orphanage director smiled and said, "Looks like you found your match." David didn't disagree. Outside, sunlight flashed off the glossy black hood of Daniel's car, a restored 1965 Pontiac GTO that looked like it had just rolled out of a showroom. Chrome trim gleamed, and the leather seats gave off the warm scent of motor oil and sun. "Buckle up," Daniel said with a grin as the engine rumbled to life, deep and confident. They drove with the windows down, the wind rushing in and tugging David's hair. Conversation came easily. Daniel asked about school, about the friends David had made, about little repairs he used to help his dad with before the mining accident. He listened, really listened, and the road unspooled ahead as if they'd been driving together for years. They turned off the main road onto a gravel lane that seemed to narrow with every curve, trees leaning overhead like a green tunnel. After nearly a mile, the woods opened into a sunlit clearing. There stood Daniel's home. A two-story house with a wraparound porch, its red tin roof gleaming. It looked inviting, but David noticed details most people might miss. An iron gate back at the road, a discreet camera mounted to a tree, and a mailbox that looked more fortified than decorative. Daniel parked beside the house and stretched. "We're far enough out here that the world leaves you alone," he said casually, but something in his tone hinted at another reason. Life with Daniel settled into an easy rhythm. They cooked breakfast together, Daniel teaching David how to flip pancakes without tearing them. They fixed the squeaky screen door side by side, Daniel showing him how to drive in the screws without stripping them. On weekends, they explored the property, hiking wooded trails that wound away from the house, or plinking tin cans behind the shed with an old air rifle. They teased each other like old friends, David calling Daniel Professor when he went into lecture mode, Daniel calling David Junior Engineer when he figured something out on his own. Sometimes David caught him working late in his office, the door closed, a faint mechanical hum leaking into the hallway. Daniel never said what he was working on, and David didn't press, but his curiosity grew. One Saturday afternoon, rain pattered against the porch roof while they played a half-hearted game of chess. Daniel moved his knight, then looked at David with a glint in his eye. "I think it's time I showed you something," he said. David raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "You'll see," Daniel replied with a faint grin, "but I think you're ready." The heavy wooden door in the hallway unlocked with a small brass key. The air smelled faintly of coffee, warm metal, and something sharper, almost like ozone. The staircase descended into a low, constant hum. The basement opened into a wide, high-ceilinged space filled with wonders. Steel shelving lined the walls, stacked with labeled jars of components, strange half-finished devices, and neatly arranged tools. Workbenches held oscilloscopes, soldering irons, and 3D printers shaping strange futuristic designs. A glass-walled lab in the corner glowed with bubbling beakers and the gleam of a microscope. Daniel showed him how a small quad-legged robot could climb walls, how a magnetic levitation table could make objects float, and how a handheld plasma cutter could slice through a soda can like butter. David laughed out loud at each demonstration, asking questions, getting his hands dirty, and grinning like he hadn't in years. Then they came to the far side of the workshop. There, standing alone in the middle of the floor, was a tall, freestanding doorframe made of brushed metal. The surface shimmered faintly, like heat above asphalt. Its design looked ahead of its time, sleek and seamless, with no hinges or handle, just a subtle panel at the side. David stepped closer, curiosity pulling him in. Daniel's tone shifted, not harsh, but firm. "Not that one, David. You can look, but you can't touch." "Not yet." David glanced up at him. "What is it?" Daniel's mouth curved into a small, knowing smile. "Something for another day. Some doors aren't meant to be opened until you're ready." They moved on, and tinkering with a small drone, but the image of that strange door stayed fixed in David's mind. Afternoons at Daniel's house quickly became David's favorite part of the day. The yellow school bus would rattle down the gravel lane, dropping him off at the mailbox near the tree line. By the time he reached the porch, a faint scent of machine oil and coffee drifted from below. Daniel was always there to meet him, a mug in hand, ready with some variation of, "Up for a project, junior engineer?" Homework came first. Daniel insisted on it. But even that turned into something different. Math problems became discussions on how algorithms worked. History lessons became side quests into the real engineering breakthroughs of those eras. Once homework was out of the way, they headed down to the workshop. Daniel never treated him like a kid who should just watch. David soldered wires, calibrated sensors, even assembled his own miniature gyroscope before his 15th birthday. Daniel's lessons went far beyond what David's teachers knew. Physics. He didn't just teach Newton's laws, he demonstrated them with high-speed camera rigs that froze moments mid-flight. Chemistry. They ran reactions that fizzed and smoked, carefully contained, each one teaching something about precision and safety. Electronics. Daniel showed him how to repair circuits so cleanly that even factory inspectors would be impressed. Programming. Instead of basic coding exercises, David learned how to write algorithms that could adapt and learn. The first time he saw a robot he'd programmed adjust its own behavior, he couldn't stop grinning. It wasn't all science. They laughed constantly. Daniel was quick with dry jokes, and David picked up the habit. They raced drones in the backfield, played chess on rainy days, and held long debates over whether pineapple belonged on pizza. By the time David turned 16, his school grades had skyrocketed, but that wasn't the real change. His teachers noticed he asked questions no one else did, about materials fatigue in bridges or the ethics of AI decision-making, things that weren't even on the curriculum. Living with Daniel never felt forced. They respected each other's space, but also seemed to share the same wavelength. If David was tinkering with something in the workshop, Daniel would wordlessly pass him the tool he needed without asking. If Daniel was buried in calculations, David would brew a second cup of coffee and slide it onto the desk without a word. And yet, even in all their openness, the mysterious freestanding door remained untouched. Sometimes David would catch Daniel glancing at it while they worked, his expression unreadable. Daniel never brought it up, and David never pressed. But he wanted to. The day had been perfect. Daniel had made breakfast, blueberry pancakes, just like the ones they used to flip together when David was a kid. They'd spent the afternoon hiking the ridge trail, their boots crunching over frost-tipped grass. And now, as evening settled in, the workshop glowed with warm light. Daniel stood at his workbench, a small package wrapped in brown paper between them. "Happy 18th, junior engineer." David tore it open to find a gleaming, precision-crafted multi-tool, every component polished, every edge perfect. "This is incredible," he said, flipping open the smallest screwdriver attachment. Daniel smiled faintly. "It's useful, but it's not your real present." He led David to the far corner of the workshop, toward the freestanding door that had stood there all these years, untouchable. Daniel tapped the side panel. Blue light coursed through hidden lines in the frame, and the center of the doorway shimmered like molten glass. A low, resonant hum filled the room. David stared. "You're actually going to tell me what this is?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I came through this door 20 years ago. I've been here ever since." David turned to him, stunned. "Where did it take you?" Daniel's eyes held his. "Not where, when." He took a deep breath. "I'm not just Daniel Atkinson. I'm David Atkinson. I'm you, 39 years older." David's pulse kicked up. "You're saying you invented this thing and came back to raise me? To raise yourself?" Daniel's smile was small but warm. "I didn't come back to win the lottery or change history. I came back to help you through the hardest part of your life. The part no one helped me through. To give you the tools, the knowledge, the confidence I never had at your age. Everything you've become, it's the head start I wished for myself. David's throat tightened. So why now? Why show me today? Daniel's gaze lingered on the shimmering portal. Because it's time for me to go back. I've been in this timeline for decades. I've done what I came to do. If I stay any longer, I risk changing too much. David stepped forward. Then take me with you. Daniel shook his head, his voice gentle but unshakable. You can't. You have to stay here. If you come with me, all of this unravels. You never grow into the man who can invent the door. You never become the me who came back. The life you're living now, it's the foundation for everything I'll accomplish later. David's eyes stung. So you're leaving me here to become you. To become better than me, Daniel said, his voice thick with pride. You've had a head start I never did. You'll build more, dream bigger, go further. That's the whole point. They stood in the glow of the portal's light, the hum steady and deep. Daniel placed a hand on David's shoulder. You've got this, he said quietly, and one day, you'll understand just how much. Then he stepped toward the door. The hum from the door deepened, vibrating through the floor and into David's chest. Its shimmering surface rippled gently, like moonlight on black water. Daniel's hand was still on his shoulder, warm and steady. You've got this, he said again, voice softer now, almost swallowed by the sound of the portal. David wanted to say something. Don't go, stay a little longer, I'm not ready, but the words jammed in his throat. Daniel stepped back, his outline briefly haloed by the portal's strange light. His smile wasn't the smug grin of someone who knew the future. It was the quiet, almost fragile smile of someone who hoped they'd done enough. He turned toward the door, paused, and looked over his shoulder. When the time comes, you'll know how to open it again. Then he stepped forward, breaking the surface as though walking into a vertical pool. The light swallowed him instantly. For a heartbeat, the hum swelled into a resonant chord, every frequency ringing in perfect harmony, a sound that felt as much as it was heard. The portal's surface shimmered violently for a second, then began to drain of color, the blue-white glow collapsing inward like ink bleeding into paper. The frame itself flickered, the metal edges losing their solidity, becoming translucent. Thin threads of light unwound from it, delicate filaments spiraling upward into the air like glowing smoke, curling and dissolving as they rose. The hum grew thinner, quieter, until it was nothing but the faint hiss of air. And then the doorway was gone, not broken, not closed, simply absent as if it had never been there at all. David stood alone in the corner of the workshop, the smell of ozone still hanging faintly in the air. On the concrete floor where the door had stood was a perfect, hairline-thin outline, a rectangle traced in something that looked like burnished silver, catching the light, no matter how he moved. The corner of the workshop felt impossibly empty. One moment, the freestanding door had been there, humming, alive, and the next, it was nothing but a faint silver outline on the floor, glowing softly under the overhead lights. David stayed there for a long time, crouched with his fingertips on that warm trace of metal, his mind turning over the same thought. He came back, just for me. Daniel, future David, had spent decades in this timeline. He'd built the house, the workshop, and 1,000 little lessons into the fabric of David's life. Every late-night conversation, every technical skill, every piece of advice, all of it was an investment in him. And now the man was gone. Not because he wanted to be, but because he had to be. Because leaving was the only way the loop could hold together. The only way David could have this head start. It wasn't just knowledge Daniel had given him. It was trust. Trust that David would use it. David stood, brushing his hands against his jeans. The workshop stretched out before him, every tool in its place, every project mid-step exactly where they'd left it. He realized something then. This was no longer Daniel's workshop. It was his. Just as Daniel had planned for him. The hum of the machines, the smell of oil and ozone, the quiet ticking of a wall clock, they were all familiar now, part of him. And if Daniel's years here had been about building a foundation, then what came next was his responsibility. He looked around at the shelves, the machines, the blank space where the door had stood, and made himself a promise. I will not waste this. I will make the most of every advantage, every skill, every insight he gave me. I will be more than he ever thought possible. That night, instead of going to bed, David sat at the main workbench. He pulled a fresh notebook toward him and began sketching. Not the little projects he'd done for fun, but big ideas. Designs that pushed the limits of what he knew. Challenges that scared him. When dawn broke, he was still there, the pages covered in diagrams and equations. The workshop's lights glowed warm against the early light outside. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he could almost hear Daniel's voice. "That's it, junior engineer. Keep going." David smiled faintly, flipped to a clean page, and kept drawing. The portal's hum deepened, filling the lab's cavernous central bay. Every eye in the room was fixed on the shimmering aperture. The air within rippled in tight, controlled waves before blooming outward into a perfect, liquid glass surface. And then, he stepped through, from basement to cathedral. For Daniel, or rather David Atkinson, 40 years older, it was like stepping from one lifetime into another. One heartbeat ago, he'd been in the low-ceilinged basement workshop he'd built with salvaged steel shelving, hand-welded mounts, and second-hand instruments scrounged from auctions. The air there had smelled of solder smoke and motor oil, the concrete floor worn smooth by years of pacing. Now he was standing in a cathedral of science. The space towered around him, its vaulted ceiling lined with gantry cranes and suspended robotics. Banks of instruments purred quietly along the walls, each one capable of measurements he could only have dreamed of when he built the first door. Holographic data streams floated above central workstations. Autonomous drones zipped along magnetic rails overhead, delivering tools and components with precision down to the millimeter. And in every direction, people. Dozens of scientists and engineers, specialists in fields he'd once studied alone at a kitchen table, moved between stations, collaborating on projects of staggering ambition. The scale, the precision, the sheer resources, it was overwhelming. He had known, in the abstract, that his younger self would take the head start and build something greater. But knowing it and seeing it were worlds apart. In that moment, Daniel felt the entire loop crystallize. Every hour spent teaching a teenage David to solder clean connections, every explanation of field theory or material stresses, every patient answer to a midnight question, it had all flowed forward to this. "You really did it," he thought. "You made something better than I ever could have." But his face stayed perfectly composed. Beatrice Hart, his senior assistant, was the first to move. She had been the last to see him before the jump, and to her, not even 10 seconds had passed. "Dr. Atkinson," she began, glancing between him and the chronometer. "It's been 8 seconds. Inside David, the memories were fresh. 40 years in the past, building the house, guiding his younger self, watching him grow into the man who created all this. The satisfaction was sharp, but so was the ache of leaving that life behind. Beatrice's curiosity finally pushed forward. "Did you see anything?" Daniel let the faintest smile touch his lips. "No." He stepped down from the portal platform, brushing an invisible speck from his sleeve. "We'll try again tomorrow." The team exchanged glances, puzzled, but unwilling to challenge him. As far as they knew, the trip had yielded nothing. But as he walked away from the portal, Daniel's gaze swept the lab one last time. The superstructure, the armies of researchers, the hum of technology decades beyond his own designs. This was no longer his workshop. It was the work of the man he had raised himself to be. And the quiet pride in that was worth more than anything he could admit aloud. And that's the end of our story. Thank you so much for listening.